Well, today's a pretty special day for our church and really what I believe for the entire Pittsburgh region. We get to launch today a book from Northway about Northway written by people from Northway. I'm excited you're here with us as we get to unpack the story of the book, 1 to 1 to 1. So it's probably no surprise to you that with me is our founding pastor, Dr. Jay Passavant. Jay, thanks so much for doing this. This is 40 years.
It is.
40 years history of our church. And what a great time to launch a book. Did you ever dream that when launching the church 40 years ago with your wife Carol and the group of folks there, did you ever dream we'd be here launching a book commemorating and celebrating the story of this church?
Absolutely not. Because implicit in our founding was we didn't have ambition to become something big or noticeable. It was all about authenticity.
Yeah.
And not many books get written about that.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. Yeah.
That's why this is, but I want to thank you for having the foresight to let us share this. So.
Of course, yeah. I think this is so important for all of us. We can never take for granted the history of where we come from and what God has done, because to me, it gives us clues and insights to what He's doing now and what He wants to do in our future together. And so I'm thrilled. I'm tickled silly to be here, to be a part of this, to play a really small part in just interviewing you guys. So I'm not here to give answers. I'm here really to ask the questions, right, and flesh out a little bit of story. And so not only am I with Dr. Jay Passavant, but I'm also with the actual author of the book, the one who worked and interviewed and pulled everything together. So Alex Hettinga, we're thrilled and honored to have you here. Thanks for your work and for being a part of this project. Was it fun? What was the experience like for you?
It was fun. It was exciting. It was a lot of work too. But I mean, what a privilege to get to sit down with so many of the founders and the privilege to almost be discipled by Pastor Jay along the way, to hear his stories right from his heart. And then, then a lot of late nights at home, transcribing interviews and putting the whole thing together. Yeah.
Writing a book is actually it's a dream for many people. A lot of people have the idea and the romantic notion of, I'm going to write a book someday. Like, how many hours did you have into this book and this study and history of Northway? If you were just to guess.
I actually kept track.
Okay. Well, so then you don't have to guess. You can report it to us. Like, how many hours specifically?
It was 400 for the first draft.
That's incredible.
And then a few more months of editing, so maybe a couple hundred more hours working with my editor.
So that's like 10 weeks of full-time work writing a book and then editing and revising and adjusting. Well, I just want to say on behalf of our church, thank you. And I would even say that thank you on behalf of future generations of folks who will be a part of Northway. Being able to pause and look back is a gift. And so we're going to unpack some of what's in the book. We're not going to give too much away, I promise. You got to pick up a copy of the book. This is, after all, a book launch, and we want you to get the book and read the whole thing. So we're not going to give everything away. But let me start before we get into the content. What started the idea? Where did the thought or the notion of we should sit down and we should capture this? Let me just ask you that question, Pastor Jay. Where did it begin?
Yeah, it had been rolling around in my mind for quite some time. I had finished my first book that I basically wrote myself, was the Seamless Succession.
That's right. Yeah.
And to your point, it turned out to be way more work than I had really recognized beforehand. But once it's done, it's substantial, and it's an accomplishment.
Sure.
The idea of the clock was running about capturing Northway really as accurately as possible in terms of our history was in my mind, but the will to do it. And I recognized it'd be a much bigger project to do it accurately.
Yeah.
And that's when, interestingly enough, Alex, who I didn't really know, came up with a bit of and I'll let him tell that story. Just share how it is that we connected. That was great.
Yeah, I mean, it was just watching a sermon at Northway, and over the years of being at Northway since college, I kept hearing about these 9 couples who started the church. And I've always loved history, and I love family history. And my first couple books that I had written were just for my family. One was for my siblings, stories of my childhood for my younger siblings, and another was a collection of miracle stories for my brother who's about to go to college. And so when I was looking for, what should my next project be, I thought, my church family, and that amazing story of 9 couples over, at the time it was only 37 years, growing to what we are now. And so I sent an email after church, one of those times that my wife is pretty familiar with, where I'm like working on an idea on the way home from church and can't think about anything else till I get it done. And sent an email to Pastor Jay, found his emails, copied Pastor Scott and my campus pastor, Pastor Dennis, as well, with just, hey, I might not be the most talented writer in the whole crowd, but here's my heart for this, the idea of generation to generation passing on what God has done. And so I got a response pretty quickly that, well, Pastor Jay's actually been trying to figure out how to accomplish this. And we got together at Walnut Grill, just right here off the property, and he started to tell me the stories of how this used to be Northway's property, and we just got into it really quickly. And
wow. That's incredible. So you initiated it, and it stemmed off, you initiated contact, you sort of reached out, and it stemmed off of hearing the story of Northway and 9 couples meeting in a basement. And sometimes founders of a movement, there can be some fun poked at how often they tell the story, right? Have you ever noticed that people are maybe rolling their eyes, or, oh, I've heard this before? Yeah, right? And I can't imagine how many times you have told the story, and yet, here's incredible fruit of telling it once again, 37 years later. Do you feel like there's a leadership lesson in there for leaders about the value of story and not quitting in retelling, especially when it's a God story? I don't know, I'm throwing a curveball right now, but I was struck by that, there's value there.
But you're not going to strike me out on that one.
I know I won't. You think great on your feet.
No, but I think back of the Old Testament.
There it is.
And, time after time they revisited that was the purpose, of the feasts and all those different moments where the children of God were called to remember those things. Yeah. And even though it was once a year, it was very important.
It was built in.
It was absolutely, and so they valued it, and that's what they carried forward.
Yeah.
So, and what was really moving to me was I didn't know Alex, but I could tell from his style of conversation, and then he let me read the books that he had published. Right. And there was such a, again, authentic conversational tone, which is what I think our people are going to see, and the people who read this book.
Definitely in here.
Yeah, it's not like reading a textbook, right. And it's not a lot of facts. It will not put you to sleep. It's fast. There's it's very real. You identify with the people. It's
definitely a narrative. As I've unpacked it, it's engaging, and it makes you want to keep turning the pages. And it makes me wonder, Alex, how did you go? What was your process? How did you go about? Because you haven't been here for 40 years. You didn't have a front row seat to the whole story, and you weren't here in 1981 when Northway launched. So what was the process like? How did you do it?
So I started by just bringing a recorder along to interviews with Pastor Jay. And as a musician, that's my background. I had a Zoom recorder, and I just hit play, and then we just talked. Wow. Or hit record and then just talked. And I had to get to know the story.
That's gotta be great.
I mean,
you just get to talk.
You just get to talk, and he would ask questions, and I would see that thing going on. Thinking, how is he ever going to unravel all that? So it was a wonderful connection. Yeah. And if I may just jump on that, and this is important to the context of the whole book and the validity or credibility is maybe a better word. It's not just my opinion. He did that same thing, that same process, with about 16 people. Okay. So I want folks to know that the book is not just what I thought about it, right? Which would have been a very limited and increasingly narrow recollection of things.
Sure, yeah. And it thickens it up with multiple perspectives, right?
Absolutely, and it gives a lot of balance to who we are and how different things affected different people. So that's one of the reasons why I think there's, again, it shifts and changes a bit because you're getting perspectives for different people. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you met with a lot of people, you interviewed, you recorded, you compiled, and then we get to actually the story and the content. So I gotta ask, I gotta put you on the hot seat just a bit. If you had to pick a favorite, what's the favorite? I know they're all favorites, right? But what's the favorite part that you think is included that is a story or a recollection or a moment that was recorded in the chapters of these books? I'm sure you're all going to get your own favorite, but I think with you being the founding pastor, I'd love to hear what was your favorite part or story that was recorded.
That's an unfair one. To narrow it down to one, because and just sort of reviewing this in anticipation of our time, I've been humbled by the number of significant moments where, and I'm sure you're discovering this, you're not even aware at the time just how significant a decision is going to be in terms of the future of the church. Clearly, one of my favorite moments was when we had our first public gathering, because remember, this was no internet days here. I mean, and there was a local newspaper that nobody read, but it was here, but it was primarily word of mouth.
Wow.
That we had been meeting for 3 months in a small collection of home groups, and that's why I've often said over the years, Northway didn't add home groups as a program. Northway started as home groups.
It was like in the fabric of the DNA.
It was in the DNA. It was in the baby before the baby was born, technically.
Yep.
And the baby was born on March 29th, 1981, at Mr. B's restaurant down there in Wexford Flats. And honestly, we didn't know if it would just be the 4, at that point I think we had 4 healthy groups going, maybe a few more. And to our astonishment, we had 250 people show up on that Sunday morning, March 29th, 1981.
Word of mouth. No internet.
Nothing.
No
mailings.
No megaphone.
No megaphones.
Use in the community.
People saying, "Hey, this church is going to be starting." And the funniest part about that story.
In 1981, that's a big church gathering.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's substantial. I mean, it was enough momentum to make me think, well, there's something happening here. Real quick, this may or may not be in there, but the proprietor of the building said, we don't rent rooms. We'd gone to him 8 days before that, by the way. 8 days, because we hadn't been able to find a place.
Good planning, yeah.
Okay, well, we couldn't find places.
Right, yeah.
And he said, well, we're a catering restaurant. And I said, well, how much food do I have to buy to get a room? And then he said, well, a Danish, a coffee, and a juice will cost you $5 or $4.95. I said, well, you know what? It's the only place in town, we'll take it. Then I had to pray, Lord, do I want, wouldn't 50 be a good number? When 250 showed up? I guess I'm not going to make it.
That's a lot of extra wedding
But
gifts.
you know what?
Yeah.
From that day on, and I mean this sincerely, I never feared that God would not provide for us.
Wow.
Because he provided that day and every day since.
Wow. You know, I love, I personally, I've been a part of Northway now for 5 years. And I've been a quiet, secret student of the church. I've always asked questions. I've always wanted to know, well, what happened and why and what did the leader do then? And I've always been told that you had an entrepreneurial spirit. And right there, that emerges right from that story of, so when there's a barrier, well, we'll buy food. It's not everybody would think that. A lot of people would hear that as a no and stop. And yet you bought the Danish and the juice and the coffee and there's been a lot of those moments, I'm sure, along the way, but that's woven into the fabric of this story, right? That has emerged of that willing to keep going.
As it's a bit of a cliche, but it's worth repeating. You know, you spell faith R-I-S-K. And you have to be willing to take risk. When you're starting any work for the Lord,
really good.
you've got, it takes faith. And faith always says, am I going to risk this? Am I going to risk not having the money on hand to pay for what I'm doing?
Do you think that's true for just starting a church or for all of life?
I think all of life. But certainly in the ministry world where people want to have more sense of, okay, we have the money in the bank to do this. We want to be, before we take any kind of step, we need to know that we're all set up. I don't find that the Lord worked that way, ever.
R-I-S-K. I've actually never heard that. That's brilliant. It's profound.
I've already given credit to somebody else. But, the basis of originality is just forgetting where you heard it.
Well, I'm going to credit you from now on, I promise you. Alex, you're writing, right? You're interviewing people, and you haven't been here. Was there anything that shocked you, like surprising along the way, something that you thought, I can't imagine, I can't believe that was a part of this, or I can't believe they did this, or I can't believe they experienced that? Anything that sticks out as you work through those 4,000 or 100 hours, whatever, 400 hours?
Yeah, I mean, some of those risks, honestly, that they took early on, and writing this as a millennial was pretty neat, because I'm writing about our founders when they were my age, Wow. And seeing people go from a successful accounting career to dropping everything to be our first youth pastor, Blaine Workman. And I think that the book will be inspiring to the younger generations, because in those early parts you get to see those moments of risk, and then to see the fruit later on. And so when you go from what those beginnings were, and you see maybe some of those beginnings in your own life, but you can't imagine what God might use you for. And then later on you see, okay, we're doing worship nights at Heinz Hall, and we've got 4,000 cars on our lot, and just some of the amazing fruit that comes out of those moments of faith decades before. Those were some of the really pleasant surprises to see.
I didn't think about it. When you say that, it sparks a thought in my mind of there's 3 different generations represented right here in this moment. And yet the faith of that story and the risk speaks to you as a millennial. It speaks to me as a Gen Xer. I'm sure it speaks and blesses you as the founder. I'm not going to put a label on that. I steered clear of that one. I saw it coming too. But I think I'm always trying to say, so why would I want to buy this book? Because it'll speak to every generation. Faith speaks across generations, right? When God responds to faith, it gives us hope. It gives us excitement. And that is packed in the stories and pages of what Alex and certainly Pastor Jay uncover. So the book, numbers for the title of a book. That's not normal. That's not typical, although it will show up early on in an alphabetical order, because oftentimes numerical titles show up at the top of my list. So I'm sure that's not the reason why we chose this, so it shows up first. But talk about, if you guys will, because you don't start with the title of a book. Sometimes you do. But for this one, just unpack the story and the significance of 12121. And by the way, this is launching on 12121 with purpose and intentionality. So if you guys want to talk about that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, Alex, as the author, was actually begging for some sort of title to give himself sort of a context. But it had to come from something that was faithful to the substance of the book and the essence of the book. And my interpretation of that, Dave, is that along the way, both Alex and Paul Spencer, our publisher, who's also a Northway participant and very committed follower of the Lord, mentioned to me that in reading the stories that you have accurately referenced, it seems like really this is a book about discipling. And there's so much that's out there that talks about the need for discipling and talks about making disciples. And we even have connections with people who have ministries about discipleship and so on. But that got me thinking about, well, how did I get here? How did I get here?
You personally?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, on the journey of faith.
Yeah.
And it was one guy and this is one of the stories there, but I'll just mention. One guy who had the courage to confront me in a college basketball locker room and asked me about my relationship with Christ. Did I know him at all? And I was very convicted because I was a Christian, but apparently my life was not reflecting that. His influence in my life over those next 3.5 years was amazing, and he modeled the whole idea of helping to speak to someone's needs and hungers, and then propelling them up. Okay, as we go through the story of Northway, it picks right up, and this is what Alex picked up on. It was. And why don't you tell how you discovered that thing going through there?
Yeah, that was actually a frustration for me all throughout, was not being able to name it, Because like I said, I was learning the story as I went. I didn't set out with an agenda, I'm going to write a book about discipleship at Northway, or I'm going to write it about prayer at Northway. But all these topics kept coming up throughout the writing process. So I had the first draft finished without a title on it. I threw different things around. I tried All That You Will Care For, which you'll read about that story in here. Yeah. I tried He Remains Faithful. I did a word search once and found, I think it was maybe several dozen times that we used the word faithful, whether it was about the faithfulness of believers or of God to us. But nothing just felt quite perfect. And the one thing that isn't about 1-2-1-2-1 that encapsulates everything in here is that's how all those things happen. That's how worship happened, was the worship directors discipling the people on their teams and discovering their gifts and honing those gifts with them. That's how our one of our greatest ministries was birthed, was us going into the city schools, 1-2-1-2-1.
You're referring to
mentoring.
LAMP. LAMP mentoring, yeah.
And so that was the one title that we came up with, and of course it's our address as well, and Jay might be able to tell that story a little bit better.
I love that, by the way. The fact that it's not only just a driving thread that's true and consistent, but it's also our address. I love it. Every time I say it, it reminds me of...
That was what, it was almost, that's what cemented it as being, at first it was not nearly as spiritual sounding as Alex's, God's faith. Of course, but what was really true to us, and maybe unique, was that. Yeah. And for our many members who don't worship necessarily at Wexford, our street address right here in this location is 12121 Perry Highway. Now that, and what you'll notice if you take a look at the photos in the back, what this looked like was not what it looks like now. When we bought it looked like, what was left after a napalm bomb hit Wexford.
It was sort of desolate and overgrown. Desolate. And
the only thing that was here was the remnants of the drive-in theater. Right. And there was a great photo or two in the back about that. But because we purchased this land, I was given permission by the township and the mail department to pick an address between, I don't know what the parameters were, something between 1100 and 1300, something like that. And I could have picked anything. And I don't know if it was just inspiration or just sounds good to me.
It's beautiful now, right?
But now it really makes sense because it is. And I think I'll even mention our home groups, our small groups, it's people caring. I mean, that's how things get perpetrated on.
And that goes back to what you said at the beginning. We didn't set out with a numerical goal. It was about people. And this isn't something you're going to see in the book, but as we were chatting about a mutual acquaintance before we started recording this moment, we were just talking about somebody who was inquisitive and excited and loves to read. And first thing Pastor Jay said was, he needs a mentor. He needs somebody in his life to help him, and that's 1-to-1 and passes it on and perpetuates, because as big of a footprint, however big Northway grows, it's about people. It's about that authentic relationship, and that's how God views us too. I love that. It's a piece for me that drew me to this church 5 years ago, and I just want to say thank you. Thanks for being faithful in that. Thanks for letting that value drive who this church is and shape.
And that, Dave, came because that's what captured me. because I experienced that.
Right.
If I hadn't experienced that,
Right.
I don't know that it was something someone could have taught me,
Right.
but because I experienced it, that's how I functioned throughout
Sure.
my stages of growth, and some of which are captured in there.
Great.
And I feel like, and by the way, it so simplifies, doesn't it? I mean, if you're
the
wondering what to do with
complexity
your
and
life,
mystery
wait a
out.
second, yeah. Anyone can do that if they're just open to the Lord leading them to do it. We used to say, by the way, to your point there a moment ago, I often get asked the question, did you set out to be a big church? Was that a goal? And I like to respond, our goal was always to raise up big people. Not to be a big church, but to be big people in Christ.
That's awesome.
And when that's your goal, then the numbers game, it falls off, takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Because big people they'll duplicate and replicate. Yep.
Yeah. You know, as you're watching this and listening, you're hearing the heart that's captured in all the stories. And it's reflective of the heart of God. It's for people. It's growing and developing and caring and nurturing for souls. I'm excited for you to be able to grab a copy of this book, to be able to read it, to be able to be in awe of how God works as it's told through the story of our church. You know, early on we mentioned it's a book about Northway, and it's written by a lot of Northway folks. So do you guys want to I think that's a unique thing, from the cover design to the publisher. I mean, there's just a lot of folks from Northway who have their hands in this. Do you guys want to bear that out, tell that to the folks who are watching right now? Who are all the Northway folks that had a hand in it? And I think that's pretty special. I think that's amazing.
In terms of the book and the production of the book itself, absolutely. But I also think that the deeper meaning is that it's a story about the people of the church. It isn't, and I think you would bear this out, it's not about a pastor who came into town and had some shining idea.
No.
Or, wasn't some sort of following of a unique charismatic figure. In fact, that was the last thing I wanted, because I wanted it to be about God. So I think it was appropriate that Northway, and the fact that we had talent to do it.
Yeah.
And
amazing talent.
yes, we did. Well, I think people will verify that as they read it. And the first time I sat with our publisher, Paul Spencer, I was a little bit cautious. One 30-year-old I can handle. Two, I was sorry. But I by the time I got home, I told Carol, he's the right guy.
Yeah. Did a great job publishing the book.
Yeah.
And obviously the writer is a part of Northway. Cover design. So amazing cover. You'll see the significance and the impact and meaning of the picture when you read the story. But that was done by
Britt Giordano,
another person who grew up at this church and
multi-generational Northway family.
Yeah. I just think that speaks of the amazing way God's blessed this church with so many different folks who follow him and want to help with a project like this. I think I said at the beginning, and if I didn't, thank you guys. This is a gift. It really, really is. I feel it's an important work that points people to God. You're right. It doesn't point to one person. This isn't the story of Jay Passavant. Certainly you're a big part of it. Certainly you played a leading role, but it's a story of God. It's a story of how he has worked, and I just want to thank you guys for capturing it and for detailing it and putting effort there. Most times we spend our attention on the future. We spend our focus on what's coming down the road, and sometimes it's important to make sure what was in the rearview mirror, what has happened, and where did we come from in order to get where we're going. So,
and I want to credit Alex with the desire to dig deep into some of those details, which I don't know that a lot of other authors would have been quite as willing to do that, and he was very careful to at some point go, line by line, our founding 10 Principles of Faith are there, things like that. He included some of the white papers, the statements about difficult subjects we had, and he even referenced some like the book that we studied in detail, The Problem of Wineskins by Howard Snyder. Yep. So anyone who comes in new, and this now has become very relevant, people just coming in and saying, I wonder what this church is really about. They don't have to guess. Now they can, if they're willing just to read and even just peruse and land on certain chapters, they'll discover. And I don't want to now shift the compliment back your way, because now what you and Pastor Scott Stevens did in the 9+ years since I handed over the baton is you've sustained and are building upon that and taking it into places, again, I never dreamed it would go. And so our hearts are behind you now, and as you take these leadership reins and the challenge in this time especially, to lead well. But I know that the same anointing that was on us back when we walked into that restaurant, in our first prayer meetings, that same anointing is on your life and on this church now. It's just going to take us in different directions, and I'm excited to see where that is.
That's kind of you. You're not supposed to be doing that right now.
That's all right. It's
talking
true.
About the book. Hey, I want to draw. You mentioned a little bit of this just a second ago. Folks who might be new, and oftentimes when I pick up a book, the question is why would I want to read this? And I just want to read something from the foreword. I love forewords of books. I often think they tell you a whole lot of what's going to happen and what it's about. And the foreword was written by Scott McCabe, Pastor Scott McCabe. Shout out to Pastor Scott McCabe. Here's what he says. He says, reading Northway's story in 12121 has given my personal story more meaning. And I'd be willing to bet that it's going to affect your story in the same way. So I want to ask that to you guys, for readers, potential readers. Do you believe that to be true? And why? Why would reading this book, this incredible book, bring meaning to people's lives? And then we're going to tell you how to get the book and, a fun surprise coming to a campus near you for everyone who attends Northway. So I don't know who wants to start off with that, but do you feel like this book will give meaning to people, and why do you think so?
I think your church family is such an important part of who you are. It's not just a place that you pick to go based on your favorite sermon style or your favorite worship style. And, there are other churches out there right now that look similar to Northway on a first visit. But understanding as you start to plant yourself and to plant your family here, seeing that the things that this church is founded on, are meaningful and just baked in experience and scripture. And so that's going to be meaningful to know. I think anybody who has been here for a long time or a short time, I've been at the Oakland campus since I've been in college 10 years ago, and many of my friends, maybe went to Northway for a few years and they moved out of state after graduating. Sure. And to be able to look back at that time in your life, those formative years, and see, that's why I felt at home at Northway, is all of these amazing things that were going on there and the spirit that I was able to partake in there. And that should hopefully keep people on a search to find that quality of fellowship and to continue to disciple people wherever they go.
Yeah, and real briefly, I would add to that, the people who aren't part of Northway. Okay, and there will be people that will receive copies of this as hey, I'd like you to read this. I think, back to one of your initial comments, that it's a story about God. And it's woven in there. And I think the context that perhaps Pastor Scott's mentioning is that as you discover what God can do with people that are willing to take those risks and willing to commit. I mean, it's one thing to be going through a buffet of churches, another thing to commit.
For the long haul.
For the long haul, and that's when life really gets shaped. And so whether someone's just searching for God, searching for a church, planning, I think all those people will find some sense of, this applies to me, this gives my life an added measure of contextualization that might really propel them into the next phase of growth.
That's good. It's a great read. It is a great book, and I promise you, when you pick it up, you're going to be blessed. You're going to see Jesus more clearly, and you're going to understand some of what he's doing in your own life more perfectly as you read this story. So, got to ask the question. This is a promotion moment, right? We're launching the book on 12121. Where do I get the book if I want to buy it? If I want to buy a copy, if I want to send a copy to someone, if I've got friends across the states and I want to mail them something, like where can you get the book?
You can order it on Barnes & Noble. You can order it from Walmart. If you want, you can get it through Amazon. We're trying to steer people towards Barnes & Noble because we like bookstores.
You're a bookstore lover, right? Yeah, that's great. So that's big time. This isn't just like, hey, only pick it up here. It's out there. It's available. It's everywhere you buy a book. Search it out. 12121. You can find the book. I interrupted you. Sorry.
Oh yeah. I mean, even your local bookstore, they have the ability to order in any book that's out on the publishing network. So you could go to your favorite local bookstore and say, I'd like to order this book. They'll look it up for you, or call it in even, and then come and pick it up at the bookstore.
That's great. That's great. And then we've got a special surprise for everybody that attends Northway. We have a copy for every family. We are giving copies away beginning this weekend, and then they're going to be available at every one of our physical locations for you to grab a copy and read as a family and share as a family group. So beginning this weekend, this is a gift. This is beginning the weekend after the launch, after the 21st. Yeah. We have these available. It's free. It's available for you. Make sure you grab one. It's just our way of saying this is important. This is valuable. It's free for everybody. So when you attend a campus, wherever it is, pick one up. Thank you guys for helping make that available and for making this work happen. Here's what I want to end with. Is there anyone you want to thank? Is there anyone that you want to give a shout out who was a part of this that maybe is just behind the scenes that you want to have a moment just to acknowledge and say thank you to?
I've got to say a couple more words about Paul Spencer, our publisher. I mean, he did this out of love for his church family as well. Put in a lot of hours with me editing, and those couple thousand copies that we're able to offer to the church. He's not taking a cut of any of that. That's at cost to the church.
Well, thank you, Paul. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then a couple generous individuals also who've made those copies available, through donation. And it's a dream to write a book and know that thousands of copies are going out. I mean, these things weigh about a pound each, so it's a ton of books that showed up here to give to our church family.
Big delivery.
I'm so thankful that this was worth writing. If I can just give a copy to my 2-year-old daughter Hannah and say, this is where your parents met. But if it goes into thousands of homes, which it's going to, I'm so thankful for people helping make that possible.
Yeah, I would acknowledge to one individual in particular, but he would probably unfriend me or whatever on Facebook because he doesn't want that kind of attention.
Gotcha.
But he knows who he is.
You can do that privately, right?
I can, but he was very, very generous and encouraging. I mean, again, we didn't lack, and certainly Northway supported it, and those things, all the people behind the scenes here that helped it to happen. It's a wonderful place to be. This church is and I feel like that gives hope in this sort of challenging time. It's a great place to be, and our future will continue to be bright based on what we know God has brought us through.
That's right. That's right. Well, we close with saying thank you to you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for digging into this story, and I'm excited for you to pick up a copy, to grab it at a physical campus. Next time you're at one of our locations in Wexford, in Oakland, with the East End. They're currently meeting with Oakland, in Dormont, in Beaver Valley, and of course, Swickley Valley and Robinson as well. You will be blessed for it. Thank you guys. Thank you for tuning in. This is an exciting day. We launch a book, 12121. Have a great time. Thanks.